Hello and welcome to a review of Flames of War, Armies of Late War source book, if you will. Flames of War is a 15mm miniatures game set in World War II. They came out early last year with the 4th edition of the rules, and what they decided to do, they started with the mid-war in North Africa, and I have some videos on those. But not everybody is into the mid-war, let alone North Africa. There were a number of players who were interested in the late war, 44-45. So Battlefront did hear what the player community had to say, and they came out with this source book. Now, why in the world come out with this source book when you already have a bunch of books? Well, those books are meant for 3rd edition, and the Battlefront guys did come up with a rule book that took into account 1939 to 41 and 44 to 45 with some conversions, as they are switching over more toward a unit card system. So this left some players clamoring, well, we'd like to have the cards for the late war units, any chance we could get those. And the folks at Battlefront, they went ahead and they listened to their player community, which very much I commend them on this. So that brings us to this book. Is this book useful for veteran Flames of War players who already have a lot of 3rd edition material? If you don't want to go through the conversions of your basic units, using some of the information that the Battlefront guys have provided, if you want to go through that, that's fine, that works, and that lets you use the 3rd edition books. But this book is designed to go straight into 4th edition rules, 4th edition points, at least for late war for now. And for that, they're making it an easy entry point for any Flames of War beginning player. Now, a veteran can benefit from this too, because you don't have to sit there and do the calculations like I mentioned. But here, well, let's have a look and see what's going on. So on the top there, it's a nice hardcover, and on the back it goes and gives you a basic description of what was happening around 1944, because it's covering the last 2 years of the war, hence the late war. It also gives you some information here about what you would get being able to build companies and whatnot. So let's get into it. Okay, so in looking at that, again, they really had the beginner in mind. What's the situation in Europe in January of 1944? Boom, they give you a map so you have an idea of geography, capitals, major cities, major rivers, and they also give you the key to tell you who is under what control. So, of course, it tells you, welcome to the late war, and they do include some historical photos to go with it, along with photos of their miniatures, because after all, Battlefront is trying to sell their line of miniatures. And then, of course, you've got your contents. And then it starts to talk a little bit about the Western Front. So this is where you have the British and the Americans going up against the Germans. Now, yes, there were other allies in there, the Poles, the Free French, the Belgian, the Dutch, but for now they're looking at American and British, and you can see where the major invasion routes took place, the major offensives that have happened. And then it talks a little bit about what was going on with Italy, Monte Cassino, Anzio. Again, this is fantastic for somebody who doesn't know anything about World War II, but they want to get into Flames of War. This grounds them with what's going on, what's happening. And what I really like about this, and being an historical guy, it's a quick, easy explanation about what's happening. Excuse me. talks about Operation Market Garden, Battle of the Bulge, the battle for Germany, and then of course it talks a little bit about the Eastern Front, where you have the Russians there going up against the Germans, and it talks about places like Smolensk, Zitomir, the pockets, and again, it also gives you the map. So the idea with that, it also can stimulate the imagination of a Flames of War player as far as, hey, where can I go and recreate a battle? Where can I go and put the scenario and put some kind of a context to the scenario, as opposed to, oh, let's go do a fighting withdrawal. It's not as fun as opposed to, okay, we're on this particular river, here's what the Russian forces look like, here's what the German forces look like, let's go at it. Okay. So again, this is looking at the invasion of Germany in 1945, as Germany was being crunched on a two-front war. There was just no way out. I would consider Italy as part of that two-front war. So it gives you a basic layout of World War II, 1944-45 in Europe. Now, what about the forces themselves? So the first one, they talk about the forces from the U.S., and it talks about who the Americans are. Again, for a new player, this gives you a quick, easy background with it, and it talks about know your tanks. What are your main American vehicles that you would expect to encounter in any American army? It gives you some technical specs, if you will, of that. And then it talks about the special rules that apply to that nation. And that's cool in that it allows nations to have their own distinct flavor, which reflected their tactics, their doctrine. How did they go about doing things? How did they go about approaching problem solving on the battlefield? So what makes 4th edition different from 3rd edition is you have formations now, and with formations you have access to support, as outlined by these charts, okay? And you can also take more than one formation. So if you, let's say you have an M4 Sherman Tank Company, but you want to take a rifle company formation, you can, because that will allow you some of the goodies that the rifle company has. Okay, but this here, this is the general U.S. support units that you're seeing here that would go for any one of these formations that you pick. So if I pick the Sherman Tank Company, I could go and have reconnaissance, I can have anti-aircraft, I can have lots of artillery, okay, as well. So then it starts looking at the M4 Sherman Tank Company, and here, when you see in the black boxes, this would be your core units. If you're making up a company, this is what you need to do. So you have your headquarters, which is mandatory. It effectively represents you. And you need to take 2 platoons of Shermans. Now, in this case here, they kind of give you some choices, because it is 44-45, and then after that you can take one of these grays if you want, or you can take all 4 depending on what your how many points you have. Then on the next page here you start looking at the individual units. Now what has been done with Flames of War 4th edition, they have come up with unit cards. I don't have any late war unit cards here. If you've seen some of my videos, you may notice that I have unit cards for the Desert War. It's pretty convenient and handy to have. Effectively, on the front side, you have all this information, and on the back, you have this information for the points and the options, but it also talks about any special rules that would be there as well. So it's pretty handy in that regards. But you have all the information you need for your regular bog standard Sherman tank here. Your motivation, your skill, what does it hit on, what's the armor, front, rear, side, top armor, and then of course your moves, your movement in inches and centimeters, and your crossing number. Not to be outdone, on the bottom here you also have a chart that shows you your weapons. What do you have? What's the range? How many dice do you roll to fire when you're moving, when you're stopped? what's your anti-tank number, what's your firepower, and any special notes that they have. So I explained a lot of things like behind the unit cards and whatnot so that it's the same for the other parts of the book, but I'm going to start just going through here so you can see different tank platoons, how the Sherman has been modified as the war goes on, the M26 Pershing platoon, which effectively was at the Bridge of Remagen battle. And you got the Super Pershing, the M4 Sherman, you have the M5 Stuart platoon, okay, the 81 millimeter armored mortar platoon, which is great when you have armored rifle platoons. It's handy dandy fire support. Here you have a tank destroyer company, which again, the limit that you've got here, you've got the M10, which was your regular tank destroyer, and then you had the M36 Jackson, which had more of a punch. It did come in a little bit later. I'm kind of surprised they did not put in the M18 Hellcat in there because it was there at the time. You have the stats again, your headquarters, okay, your platoons, you have your M20 security section, you got the stats on the Jeep as well. Next thing is the armored infantry, okay, also known as the Blitz Doughs. Doughs referring to doughboys of World War I. They refer to them as your basic infantry, and the Blitz, with those half tracks, they're able to move around a lot and fast. So you can see, again, it's the same basic force structure diagram. Your headquarters, you need your 2 basic combat units, and then after that you can start adding to it, okay? And then you can see what can be done, what other options there are. Now you come to the rifle company. Okay, no glorious vehicles here, but you do have infantry and you're able to do things with them. You also, remember, you can also take a platoon from an armored company to join up with your rifle company as support. Okay? So here, Rifle Company HQ, the platoon, the machine gun platoon, mortar platoon, AT gun platoon, okay, chemical mortar cannon platoon, okay, and then here you got the U.S. support units, 105s, and the M7 Priests, armored artillery. Okay, you can never have enough artillery. Okay, infantry observers, anti-aircraft platoon, armored M4 Sherman observation, another observer. Okay, now here the anti-aircraft platoon, the M16 quad 50 caliber half track. They were also called meat choppers. They were devastating against the ground target. Nasty stuff. Okay, let's move on. You also have an M8 Cavalry Recon Platoon. Your fighter support is a Thunderbolt. Interestingly, I have not used the Mustang. I guess maybe it was more for air superiority and whatnot. Now we move on to the Germans. I'm going to move a little bit faster here. So the Germans, it's the same format. Talks about who the Germans are. And then it talks about knowing your basic tanks. Which, you know, if you're going to be playing Germans, yes, you should know your tanks. I understand that, you know, there's slight differences between the different models of the Panzer IV in the late war, but for pretty much game purposes, it's pretty much the same. There are different kinds of camouflage that the German tanks used, depending on what was needed and what was available in terms of paint. So you have a German force here, so you have quite a few. You got 6 possible companies to choose from: a Tiger, a Panther, a Stug, a Panzer IV, tank companies, Grenadier companies, the Panzer Grenadier, think armored rifles. So they're on parity with the other forces that are there. And again, it gives you German special rules. And we start out with a Tiger company. Shocker, because Tigers seem to be fairly popular. But they also cost a lot of points, and they only got 1 gun on it. So that kind of makes it, you know, it's an iffy proposition on this. All right, let's keep going. So you can also have a Panther Company, which what's kind of cool about it, it allows you to take You've got your headquarters, first platoon. Your second platoon could be a Tiger platoon or a Panther platoon. You can take another platoon that's a Panzer IV or another Panther platoon, and that it reflects the flexibility that the German armored units had. At that stage of the war, it was kind of like, okay, what can we scrape up together to take on the Russians? Okay, so here is your assault gun, Stugs, okay? And then here the Panzer IV, the workhorse of the German Panzer armies. It is the only design that has started in 1939 and gone all the way to 1945. So again, Armored AA Platoon, Panzer Grenadier Platoon with the iconic half-tracks. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so you got your company, your Panzer Grenadier Platoon, your half-tracks, okay, Armored HMG Platoon, your Mortar Platoon, okay. You also have various types of anti-tank and anti-aircraft weaponry as well, which is useful. You also have the Grenadier as well. Again, I'm just going to go flying through so you can see it's still the same format. These, you can find them separate on separate unit cards that they do have for sale on here. But again, you don't have to buy the cards to play. You could use this book and you're good. Okay. So here you get a bunch of support. The famous 88. You got the armored cars. Okay. Artillery support. You got 3 versions of that. Rocket launchers, Panzer III observation, infantry observers, and then of course the famous Stukas. Okay, so you've got one that's got the cannon mounted, and then you got the other that is bomb mounted. So you have to take one or the other. There's pros and cons to both. British. Okay, again, who are the British? Gives you a background. Your basic British tanks. Yes, they did use Shermans and M10s made in the United States, but they also tricked them up in their own way. British force, and you notice it's very similar to the American force or the German force. And then again, British special rules like the Bulldog, the night attack, semi-indirect fire. And then, of course, you got your Sherman Armored Squadron. When I saw that, I was thinking Operation Market Garden 1944, the 30 Corps going up the road on the way to Nijmegen. Cromwell's, again, another armored squadron. Comets, okay, later on in the war. Churchill's, yep, got the Churchill tanks in there. The Motor Company. Okay, again, those guys are the ones that are in the half-tracks, or in this case, maybe the Bren carriers. All right, moving on. Then your bog standard rifle company. Again, with mortars, heavy mortars, 6-pounder anti-tank gun, armored transport, Vickers machine gun, British support units here. So you can see with armored cars of different types. You got the Typhoon tank busting flight. Okay, anti-aircraft, the Bofors, artillery, 25-pounders, the Sexton, the Priest. So a lot of things there. And then, of course, the Sherman OP and then the infantry OP. Last but not least, okay, we got to look at the Russians. Again, same thing. You got a background, but you also get to know your iconic Russian tanks. Okay, special rules for the Russians. Now, keep in mind, these nationalities play differently because they have their own way of doing things. So for a new player, you know, maybe the Americans and the Germans are more forgiving. I don't know. I just enjoy playing. And that's it. So, basic Soviet force. You got a T-34 tank battalion there. And you can see with T-34-85s, Valentines. You got tank riders to go with them. Churchills, okay, the Lend-Lease, the IS-2, the Joseph Stalin II tank company as well, so you can have those. A rifle battalion. Now, all the ratings of all the units in this book are confident veteran, so you're not having the variety like fearless trained or reluctant trained. Okay, I believe that Battlefront decided to do this to keep things simple between the players while they are easing themselves into the 4th edition. But there's nothing that is stopping you from using the 3rd edition books and using 4th edition rules. They did include the conversions. Okay, but with the Russians, again, you've got 4mm AT gun. Yeah, those are fun. Okay. And then, of course, flamethrower T-34s. And then, of course, you got assault guns, which can be really nasty. Okay. The ISU heavy assault guns, it can be 122mm or 152. Both are extremely nasty. Russian artillery, Red God of War. Pile them up and start pounding. Okay. Katyushas. No Russian army could be complete without the Guards rocket mortar battery. Those are rocket launchers, guys. Those are the Katyushas. The screaming that the rockets when they would fly off the trucks. Nasty stuff. Sturmovix, okay. The Sturmovix, compared to the Stukas, the Sturmovix has the cannon, it has the bombs, and it has the rockets. They got everything. So you can sit there and pick and choose while your plane is going over the table and picking a target. Go figure that. So these are overall special rules that all the nations will take as far as what does that mean when it's a heavy weapon, what does it mean when it's a scout, etc., etc. And then, of course, it gets into the basing guide as well as we are going through. Okay, and then a painting guide. So again, this is really beginner friendly, and that's awesome. I think it's great, because if you want to get people into the hobby, you want to make it an easy access point. Okay, so it also gives you some tips on decals. It also gives you some tips on how to weather some of these guys, but you can find more tutorials online. But there's for the Americans. Here you go for the Germans. For all the camo schemes I have on my tanks, I've never seen one that looked like that. That's an interesting one. Okay. British. I have a skeletal British Sherman squadron for our market garden in conjunction with my U.S. paratroopers from the 101st. And then the Russians. Okay. Pretty much with the Russians, it's one color. Russian green. Or they call it Tankovy green, or depending on the paint that you get. And then, of course, shows you, what the Russian troops look like. And then, of course, where do I go? I like this. I want to go. How do I start? This is showing you what the starter boxes look like. For the money, it's actually a pretty good deal. You get a balance of units in there. There are no infantry, but you do get the cards that belong with these units here as well. The individual unit cards, they do have those additionally. And then, ladies and gentlemen, British Armored Battle Group, and then, of course, the Russian Battle Group. And you can see, it tells you which ones that you are getting. And for the T-34s, you have the option of having them as 76 millimeter or the 85 millimeter, which is really cool, because then you can start using the T-34 76s. You can actually use that in mid-war as well. So this looks fairly attractive to me. The others, I have stuff, so it's not a biggie. At the end of the book, in the back cover, it gives you a guide about the turn sequence. Where do you start? How do you go? And then movement, and then shooting, and then more shooting, and then artillery, and then assault. Again, it looks a little overwhelming, but if I were a new player, I would start out with just tanks, just to get the basics of the game, and then go from there. All right. So, is it worth picking up? I think so. It's quick and easy to go for a veteran. It's quick and easy to go make some 4th edition forces. You don't have to do any calculations, for losing command teams or losing observer teams. It's all here ready to go. If you are a beginner Flames of War player, I highly recommend this. This will make things look really awesome. Now, if you want to go and do, if you want to go recreate some of the battles, there are plenty of other Flames of War books out there that cover different parts of the war, which is really cool, just buying them themselves, because you get to learn more about that. But at this point, $20 American for this book, I think it's worth it. So I'm definitely giving a thumbs up. Hey, I hope this review has been beneficial to you. Goodbye, and God bless.